Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Sally Burdett. Our top stories. President Xi Jinping promises big changes to deepen reforms and further open up the world's second largest economy.
We have to do with,
Lost for words, panic among United States Democrats as Joe Biden stumbles and stutters his way through the first presidential debate.
Raise taxes to cut debt levels. That is the blunt message from the International Monetary Fund to the United States.
Argentina's President Javier Milei wins backing for a sweeping program of economic reform aimed at kick-starting the country's troubled economy.
And no more range anxiety or long waits to recharge. The battery breakthrough which could jumpstart EV sales.
US President Joe Biden is under intense pressure to step aside as the Democratic candidate in November's election following a rather bumbling performance in the first debate.
His opponent, former President Donald Trump, made a number of claims that were untrue while launching personal attacks and evading key questions. However, many commentators concluded Trump came across as the sharper of the two candidates. At the age of 81, even Biden's supporters have voiced concern that his age could derail his re-election bid.
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare.
OK, well, our correspondent, Michael Marillier, has been looking at how this debate has unfolded across social media. Michael.
Thanks very much, Jamie. Now, Joe Biden is trending on X, but not for the reasons that people would have.
I'm terribly sorry. We're going to come back to that because we have a slight technical problem, which means we can't get the camera there just at the moment. In the meantime, we will return to the US, and we'll come back to that a little later in the programme. Let's go to Philip Crowther, who's the Associated Press correspondent in Atlanta.
Well, look, this goes considerably deeper than the usual discussion we might have after a presidential debate, which would essentially be, well, who won it and who lost it. For the statistics, though, it was essentially Donald Trump who didn't necessarily win this debate, but it was certainly President Joe Biden who lost it. In Democratic circles, there's still a little bit of shock when it comes to what they saw on screen yesterday. There's disappointment, and there's a little bit of panic as well. The bar was pretty low for Joe Biden, a bar that was essentially set by Donald Trump and his campaign, who had put in doubt Joe Biden's capability of being able to debate for 90 minutes in the first place, saying that he was just too old to be president. But all those doubts have come to the fore again, all those moments of doubt from Joe Biden during the debate, the raspy voice as well, the huge difference in terms of how he debated Donald Trump 4 years ago was there for all to see. So among Democrats, there's a little bit of panic, though a lot of high-ranking Democrats are still saying they're standing firmly behind Joe Biden. And we haven't mentioned the Republican response to this yet. They don't really have much to say this morning. They are ecstatic with how this went for Donald Trump last night.
The big question, of course, Philip, is Joe Biden either going to step down or get kicked out from this presidential race by the Democratic Party? Is it possible to say at this point what's going to happen next?
No, impossible to say. It's going to be interesting what happens over the next few days and weeks. The best case scenario, I think, for Democrats is that they realize that maybe not all that many people were watching this debate in the first place, maybe that it happened too early in the electoral calendar, that people are not yet tuned into this U.S. election in November. Of course, ironically, it was the Biden campaign that wanted this debate to be organized this early in June, as opposed to September so that they could remind voters of all the weaknesses of former President Donald Trump. Right now, in Democratic circles, at least behind the scenes, there is talk about what could possibly be done. Can Joe Biden be replaced? But certainly in public and among the most high-ranking Democrats, this is not yet being mentioned. The likes of Vice President Kamala Harris or the First Lady Jill Biden very much standing behind Joe Biden still. And also the likes of some of the surrogates who were in the spin room yesterday defending Joe Biden's performance. That includes the likes of Governor Gavin Newsom of California. A lot of talk about him today in Democratic circles and in the U.S. media, whether he could possibly jump in. But for all of this to happen, though, one first thing has to happen on behalf of Joe Biden. He would essentially have to agree to step aside, and then the race to find his replacement would happen. It would feel right now like we're a long way away from that, but all it takes is one decision from the current president.
OK, well, that's the aftermath in Atlanta. Let's see if we can talk now to our correspondent, Michael Marillier, who's been looking at how this debate unfolded on social media. Michael.
Thanks, Jamie. Now, Joe Biden is certainly trending on X, but not for the reasons the president would have hoped. Republicans have slammed his performance in the debate. Missouri Senator Eric Schmitt saying it was beyond embarrassing. It was disturbing. Schmitt also saying the president is supposed to project strength, and our adversaries abroad saw everything but that. Now, defending Biden, the Democrats came out firing before the debate even began. Vice President Kamala Harris posting a video in which some of Donald Trump's former staff say he's a threat to democracy. We saw something similar after the debate. The Biden-Harris election campaign tweeting a link to a website which explores Trump's so-called 2025 project. You can see the video they posted there. Their message in this post: every single American needs to know about Trump's plan to destroy our democracy. But some Democrats were not quite so positive about the president. In fact, some are now calling on Biden to admit he's no longer fit for office. Former State Senator Alessandra Biaggi tweeted that Biden is an honorable man, but that it was time for him to step aside and call off his campaign. Biaggi also saying the Democrats must find a strong candidate with a few months to go before the election. And some more reaction. Van Jones is a former advisor to the Democrats. He posted, "I love Joe Biden, but tonight's debate hurt." Jones has also said there are a lot of people who think the president should take a different course ahead of the Democratic convention. That appears to be a suggestion that it's time for Biden to step aside as the party's candidate. Jamie, Sally?
Michael, thank you very much indeed.
All right. Let's stay with this topic. And Eric Ham is a political analyst joining us from Washington now. Hello, Eric. First of all, what did you make of the debate?
Well, it was a disaster for both candidates. Even though we know who Joe Biden is and who Donald Trump is, these have been fixtures of American politics. Joe Biden for half a century, and Donald Trump, of course, when he came down that gilded escalator back in 2015. What we got from one man was a bevy of lies and a refusal to admit that he would accept the results of an election. And, of course, the other, someone who seemed to freeze and unable to actually speak to the nuance of his own policy. So not a very good night for either candidate.
The talk now is whether Joe Biden should withdraw from the campaign. Do you believe that's really on the table?
I think it is a question that Joe Biden himself is going to have to answer. Look, he is the one who actually called for this debate. He's the one who laid out the rules of engagement for this debate. And he had a very, very bad night. And Joe Biden went into this debate with one central question, and he failed to answer that question in any succinct fashion. And so today he has to continue to try to address that question. And if he cannot address the issue of his age and fitness, then he needs to step aside and let the party actually decide who will be the person who will stand in. It's unclear if Joe Biden is going to do that. And I doubt that those conversations are even taking place within the Biden campaign right now. But again, these are questions that Joe Biden is going to have to answer. Now, to be clear, if Joe Biden had answered the age and fitness question last night emphatically, it would still be a question that will dog him through November. So this is something that he has to try to pivot and focus if he's going to stay in this race. And if he's not, then he's got to decide that sooner rather than later.
There's been quite a lot of talk that if he stays on, he would need to perhaps surround himself with people to show that there's a lot of strong Democratic people around him. But are there actually any strong candidates who could pick up the mantle now and run with it for the next 5 months and possibly win for the Democrats?
I just don't think that's a question that we can ponder right now, because the only way that will happen is if Joe Biden actually decides to step aside, and we have no indication that he is going to do that. Now, let's talk about Joe Biden as a president. Joe Biden as a president has an entire administration that is governing, and we cannot deny the fact that this administration has been very successful. And so we know he has surrounded himself with a quite capable team to actually do the job now through November.
All right, thank you very much, Eric Ham, political analyst from Washington there.
Well, that's the U.S. presidential debate. Let's talk about the U.S. economy now. The International Monetary Fund is calling on the United States to raise taxes in a bid to try to curb rising debt. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York. John, not an entirely helpful intervention in the run-up to a presidential election. What's the International Monetary Fund's point here?
Well, how interesting is it that the IMF comes up with this in the last 24 hours or so? And it is the unelected International Monetary Fund, a global body, meeting the elected politicians of Washington, D.C., who are not going to take much attention to what they've had to say. Now, the IMF has written in what they call Article 4. It's a review of U.S. economic policy. It does this every year. In fact, it does it more than once a year. You can get updates on and off on their website. The IMF is seeking tax hikes, not cutting taxes. So you can see this is a very contentious issue here in the United States. They are worried about the debt and the deficit. Now, the deficit is the amount of money less that the U.S. brings in through taxes than it actually spends every year, and the debt is that amounted over many years, as you know. Now, they're saying this over at the IMF, which is very close to the White House, by the way, just down the road on Constitution Avenue there. They're saying this despite lowering inflation. We have PCE, which is a key inflation bit of data, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, came out this morning, clearly coming down, and also very strong growth. And indeed, the IMF says that the U.S. is best placed in the world when it comes to growing its economy and to basically having a strong economy going forward over other regions and countries. Now, the IMF is in particularly worried about what they call the GDP to debt ratio. They fear it'll be 140% by the end of the decade, 2030. And they cite the cost of things like government pensions, social security, and medical health care provision. Now, a lot of that is quite limited in the United States. As you know, the health care is Medicaid and Medicare, which they talked about in the debate last night, by the way, and that only kicks in once you basically retire. But it is very, very expensive. Now, this is the second year in a row the IMF has called for tax hikes in the United States, and they're calling for them this time, not just on wealthy people, but on people who own less than $400,000 a year. And I think $400,000 a year is the cutoff for President Biden. He says nobody will pay taxes more under my administration if they earn less than $400,000. Here's the IMF saying, get in there and hike the taxes on them. So you can see why elections and politicians in the U.S. are likely not to pay very much attention to this. Spending, deficit, and debt did not really come up in last night's very, very worrying debate. Everybody here saw it and is very concerned about what happened. And on a side issue, the IMF is also slightly downgrading U.S. growth. For 2024, 2.6%, not 2.7. 1.9 for next year, that's where they said it would be back in April, and about 2% running through the end of the decade. So IMF coming up with an interesting document, but in an election year like this, it will just be put on the shelf in Washington.
John, can I just pick up on something you mentioned there, the personal consumption expenditures price index? It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But this is a closely watched inflation gauge that the Fed uses for this magic 2% target. So some reaction today to PCE.
Yes. Well, the markets loved it. They liked it. This personal consumption and expenditure was published about 8:30 this morning, an hour before they opened. It came in at 2.6%, exactly where economists thought it would be for the month of May, and that is the lowest in 3 years. The last time it was this low was back in 2021, and that was the moment that we crossed over from the 2% inflation that we'd had for years and years and years onto the route that we've had in the last 3 years, where it's been going up and up and up. Core inflation as well, core PCE, strip out energy and food, those volatile things have gone, and still the prices are cooling. And the Feds pay very close attention to this because it's a more detailed form of explanation about inflation than is CPI or PPI, which is the one that is always the big headline that we report on here. Now, this all follows the weekly jobless numbers yesterday, coming in at their highest in 3 years, 2021 again. The weekly number went down a bit yesterday, but overall, there are more people claiming insurance at the state level than there have been in the last 3 years, and Wall Street takes that as a sign that the economy is slowing much more than the official numbers suggest, and that therefore there will be a rate cut either in July or September and December, and possibly even all three. So based on that, we have the Nasdaq and the S&P 500 hitting intraday highs. The Dow has been in the green. It's just turned negative by about 3 points. And the 2-year yield on the interest rate there, the 2-year Treasury bond, is down to 2.66%. And that is with government policy. So Wall Street ending the day and the week and the quarter, of course, this is the end of the quarter, at the moment on a very positive note.
John, thank you for that. Happy Friday. Our correspondent, John Terrett in New York.
Chinese car maker Geely's net income more than doubled in the 3 months to the end of March compared to the year before. The profit surge was boosted by robust car sales, including its new range of energy-efficient vehicles. Revenue passed $7.3 billion in the first quarter, with overall vehicle sales increasing by more than 45% year-on-year.
Thousands of UK banking customers have been unable to access their money as several major high street banks suffered outages to their online services. HSBC, Nationwide, Barclays and Virgin Money were all affected. The banks have since issued an apology to customers and claimed problems have been resolved.
Chinese firm City Green Sports Group has signed a deal with English Premier League club Tottenham Hotspur to become the club's official AstroTurf supplier. The agreement will see City Green install a new synthetic pitch at Tottenham's North London training ground. The pitch hosts the academy's men's and women's teams as well as community events.
Japan's health supplement maker Kobayashi Pharmaceutical says it's investigating 76 deaths that may be linked to its commercial yeast supplement used to reduce cholesterol. In March, the company said it was examining 5 fatalities potentially linked to red yeast rice pills, which contain a mold culture. The country's health ministry said it was extremely regrettable that the rise in suspected cases was not reported earlier.
America's NFL has been ordered to pay almost $5 billion in damages in a class action lawsuit after a court ruled it had violated antitrust laws by inflating TV packages. The lawsuit covers 2.4 million residential subscribers and 48,000 businesses who paid for the packages in the 2011 to 2022 seasons on DirecTV. Under federal laws, the damages could be tripled. The NFL says it will appeal. Now, Argentina has approved a wide-ranging package of reforms aimed at kick-starting the country's troubled economy. The 2 separate bills include plans to privatize state-owned industries and overhaul the tax system. It's been hailed as a victory for President Javier Milei, who was elected last year, promising change. Let's talk to our correspondent Joel Richards in Buenos Aires. Hello, Joel. So this legislation, it's had quite a difficult passage through the Congress. Why has it been so controversial?
Well, it's the sheer scale and scope of this reform package that is so controversial, and the fact that such a comprehensive reform package is being approved by Congress in one fell swoop. The approved draft includes over 230 new laws. Now, that is a third of what the government initially submitted as part of its omnibus bill last December. So negotiations have been ongoing since December, but precisely because it touches so many nerves in Argentina's society. Over 230 new laws, then there's a lot to discuss here, but some of the key highlights and which explain why this is such a sensitive issue and why it's stirred such debate in Argentina is some of the issues that it touches on. Tax, for example, increases for many middle-income sectors, but there is tax relief for high earners. There is a change to many labour laws, which will see labour laws eased, and essentially many critics are saying that that's an attack on people and workers' rights. You mentioned a series of privatisations as well as state-owned companies, and then there's this scheme that looks to bring in foreign investment. It's called RIGI in Spanish. It's looking to bring in foreign investment on very generous terms, and one of the key stumbling blocks and one of the key criticisms is that the terms offered to foreign companies is far more favourable than it is to Argentine companies. So there's the big question, really, who this reform package is favouring, and that is what has stirred this controversy.
Yeah, so where does this actually leave President Javier Milei's pledge? Because he said he was going to end the economic crisis in Argentina, but as you explained, some of these changes are quite controversial.
Well, this is the big question. Can Javier Milei now deliver on his promise to transform Argentina's economy? It certainly sounds like he will transform it. The question is, what will that economy look like later? Up until now, what we've seen from Milei has been slashing public spending in an effort to push down one of the world's highest inflation rates, and he has achieved that. He's also achieved the country's first fiscal surplus in over a decade. So those are the positives, but the flip side of that is that economic activity has crumbled. We saw the latest GDP figures just very recently in the last couple of days. For the first quarter, Argentina's GDP dropped by over 5%. So the massive, dramatic fall in economic activity. Milei had been saying that Congress was holding him back by not approving this reform package. He said that Congress was a rat's nest. Well, now Congress has given him the green light, and it is up to Javier Milei now to deliver on that pledge to improve, to turn around Argentina's economy.
All right, thank you so much. Joel Richards coming to us from Buenos Aires.
You're watching CGTN, still ahead.
And after a difficult decade, businesses in the north of England would like the next UK government to secure a stable bridge to a more prosperous economy and fewer financial shocks.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliette Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. With the United Kingdom gearing up to vote for a new government in a matter of days, we've been visiting different parts of the country to better understand what's on voters' minds. It's an uncertain time for businesses, both large and small. A new government could mean new rules on planning and taxation. Our correspondent, Yola Abdavid, reports from Hull in the north of England.
Food is never out of fashion. It's a sector, according to official data, that keeps on growing. The gross value of Britain's agri-food industry in 2022 was $186 billion. Cranswick Country Foods calls itself a farm-to-fork business and has the UK's largest pork-producing plant on the outskirts of Hull.
We ask two things of any government. One is access to markets and one is access to staff. We can do the rest ourselves. We're a very, very forthright business. We're a very precise business and we're a very demanding and future-looking business as well.
With 14,000 staff in 23 sites, they have a third of the UK pork market. 145,000 metric tons are prepared and delivered every year from here. Cranswick exports to more than 25 countries and its annual turnover is $3.3 billion.
Who forms the next government and which policies it introduces will be hugely influential to bigger companies and smaller businesses after three major shocks to the UK economy. They are, of course, Brexit, the COVID pandemic, and the continuing battle between Ukraine and Russia in Eastern Europe.
Katrina Moore moved to this renovated shop 18 months ago. Her flowers cost more now since she imports from the Netherlands. New custom checks and tariffs leads to delay and costs being passed on by wholesalers.
The annoying thing is when you didn't have to have all these checks before and you could get a delivery within 24 hours. Now you've got to have a delivery within 48 hours. So if you order it on a Monday, you can't get it till a Wednesday. Whereas before Brexit and before all the different changes, we could get it in within 24 hours.
Another issue is buying online, which leads to empty streets and fewer shops in city centres like Hull. There's also the rising cost of living that's crippled tens of thousands of families in the UK, forcing many to depend on support and public services.
I think there are a lot of challenges there, and I think it's going to be difficult to address those. It's partly also difficult when there are certain constraints over, for example, saying the tax burden is at its highest, say, for about the last 50 to 70 years. Now, that applies an extra constraint.
To feed its expansion into poultry and Mediterranean food, as well as pork, Cranswick's profits are ploughed back into the business. Forward planning often leads to growth and an increase in revenue, but that depends on stability and an assured government.
We want to invest heavily in the future, but we need planning in order to be able to achieve that. So those are the areas that we'd like the support on, and an area and an interest in the expansion and promoting our products internationally as well as at the local level.
The 2-kilometre Humber Bridge is a gateway to the south. The wide estuary and the port of Hull is connected to Rotterdam. More investments will be expected from a new government to stimulate growth, but the unknown factor is if higher taxes will have to be paid to fund it.
And Yolo's back from his travels, joining us in studio. Yolo, it's often said that elections boil down to what's happening with the economy. Is that the case with the UK election?
Well, I think the businesses are definitely hoping that. And elections are about judgment about the past as well as the role of government in the future. And, you know, we've heard a lot from the government saying we've had lots of terrible shocks in the last 14 years of Conservative rule. And Jeremy Hunt, the former Chancellor, the current Chancellor at the moment, I should say, he said, well, the recovery from the global financial crisis, the global pandemic, and obviously the energy shock with the Ukraine and Russia conflict, but they don't refer to Brexit. And Brexit, according to the businesses, and that lady in the flower shop in Hull made it clear that Brexit had a big impact on her business, and it's also had a business, obviously, an impact on bigger businesses. So what a new government, and if it is a Labour government, given the opinion polls standing at the moment, what are they going to do? How are they going to improve the economy? We heard Adam Couch there from Cranswick Country Food saying we need certainty, we need to know exactly where are the regulations on planning, how are they going to simplify, where's the detail in their policies, and that's what they're really after. And you would also, when you listen to the conflicting analysis by both of the main parties, Labour and Conservatives, who of course will lead a government in the future, how are they going to have sustained growth? If they talk about comparison with France and Germany, the United States and Canada, how are they going to sustain that growth? Where are the workers coming from? Which policies are in place to improve the economy, especially And I had to read this several times. In 14 years of Conservative rule, 5 prime ministers, 7 chancellors, 7 financial ministers, and of course the Liz Truss, when she was prime minister in 2022, 44 days, and the chaos, the financial chaos, the economic chaos from that. So I think overall businesses want certainty.
Yeah, and we know that the markets hate a vacuum. We are seeing some stability in the British economy. Is it likely to make a difference, though?
Well, I think it will in some ways. I have a feeling that voters have decided a long time ago that they want to punish the current government, not just this government, but the previous Conservative government as well. But yes, you know, GDP figures, I'm just reading them now, 0.7% up for January, March this year. That follows that very shallow recession at the end of last year. Maybe, you know, some businesses will feel confident by that. The majority of people, though, are worried about taxes. Are they going to go up? And, of course, businesses are more worried about if the tax burden, if the national debt, as Rachel Reeves, who may become Chancellor in a week's time, she said that we will be looking at that. We're looking at the wealth, the creating wealth. But the real questions are about the details and how they will do it, and what is the stability that'll underpin the UK economy after this election?
Yeah, this time next week we should have some answers. Thank you very much, Viola Abdavid, speaking to us there.
Well, on Sunday, France heads to the polls for the first round of its snap parliamentary election. 3 main parties or alliances have come to the fore. The Renaissance Party, the National Rally, and a newly formed left-leaning coalition, the New Popular Front. All this week, we're looking at who the main players are and what they're promising. Let's look at the National Party. The final poll ahead of this election suggests a surge in support for this party, synonymous with the Le Pen family. Marine Le Pen stepped down as the leader in 2021. Its support has surged under a new young president, 28-year-old Jordan Bardella. Remember his name. Expectations that the National Rally would embark on a big spending programme initially rattled investors over fears that they would push up national debt. But the party's rolled back on those pledges to try and show it can be trusted with the public finances. It's promising to end high budget deficits, and it says it'll stick to EU fiscal rules and be a pro-business government. Well, Bardella had maintained a hard line on rolling back President Macron's controversial pension reforms, pledging to lower the retirement age from 64 to 60. But that pledge has been softened, with Bardella saying it will not be a priority. On climate, the National Rally says it wants to stop what it calls punitive ecology. It wants to roll back on major areas of the EU's Green Deal, which it says restricts freedom of choice, affecting farmers' livelihoods. France saw months of protests by farmers over those proposed new measures. We reported on them. On the Ukraine-Russia conflict, Bardella says he backs Ukraine's right to defend itself, but he won't support sending long-range missiles to Ukraine that could be fired on Russia, which he says could trigger a wider conflict. Immigration is a key campaign issue for the National Rally. Bardella, the son of Italian immigrants, is credited with helping clean up the party's extremist image. He's called on voters to back the party's anti-immigration law and order programme, saying he would make it easier to deport foreigners convicted of crimes. Well, the European elections earlier this month saw Green parties lose support. They slipped from 4th to 6th place, raising questions over whether the EU will weaken its climate ambitions. The Greens took an absolute hammering in France, where farmers say Europe's Green Deal policy is damaging their ability to stay competitive. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas reports now from Paris.
It is potato harvesting season for Antoine, a local farmer just outside Lyon, France. Antoine acquired this farm a decade ago, dedicating his efforts to cultivating various vegetables, particularly tomatoes. What he once saw as a promising future on his farm is now becoming a struggle to keep up with the changing times.
The main challenge for farmers today is dealing with unfair competition. For instance, our tomatoes cost us €4 per kilo to produce, while Italian tomatoes cost €2 per kilo. The competition between these two productions is not fair. The common agricultural policy subsidies are not enough to compensate for the income gap. We will disappear. Farmers will disappear. It's already happening.
That is what Antoine and many other farmers like him protested about in March: the right to fair competition. The farmers protested for weeks over what they say were excessively restrictive environmental rules, competition from cheap imports from outside the European Union, rising costs, and low incomes. Thousands hit the streets with tractors blocking main highways and threatening to enter the French capital, forcing the government to promise measures over $400 million. But 3 months on, Antoine still hasn't seen a change in the government's priorities.
Our job is not to reduce greenhouse gases, but to produce food. That should be our focus in France and throughout the EU. What European farmers demand is protection and guarantees. We need to be excluded from free trade agreements and the single market. Food should be considered an essential good and it should be protected.
Some might say that the EU Green Deal does precisely that for France, by protecting the farmland and eliminating pesticides while investing in biomass and renewable hydrogen for the production of energy and fuel. However, there are those who say that this initiative is headed in the wrong direction.
Le message adressé par l'Union européenne n'est pas.
The EU's message is not the right one. I was with farmers on highways during the blockades in January and February in France. I met and talked with them. And what emerged is that the EU's rules are imposed without considering the on-ground realities, especially in France. The EU Green Deal doesn't account for farmers' constraints and tends to portray them negatively. We want the official to look in a different direction.
Sans prendre en compte la réalité du terrain.
And that direction for Antoine is more protection. Protection, as he says, from unfair competition. Evangelo Sipsas for CGTN, Paris.
And elections are underway in Iran, with voters there deciding on a successor to President Ebrahim Raisi, who died in a helicopter crash last month. Two conservative candidates are vying to win, but they're facing a challenge from a reformer who's promising change. Masoud Pezeshkian has vowed to improve Iran's relations with other countries and end the international economic sanctions that have brought hardship. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Adel Al-Marouki in Tehran. Adel claims that many young Iranians, in particular, would boycott this election. What's your sense of the turnout?
So the official announcement just about an hour ago that the turnout has reached about 26%. Over 16 million Iranians out of more than 61 million have so far voted. Now, the turnout is a digital calculation through which all Iranians register their ID online so that repetitions could not happen from one ballot station to the other. The counting, however, is a manual process. There is a lot of just taking a look around in the ballot stations, you don't see a significant presence from the youth. Of course, these will be part of the official statistics of the turnout later on that will take maybe a few days after even the result has been announced. But due to that low turnout, but at the same time the ballots have long queues, the Iran government has decided to extend the vote. It first extended it by 2 hours until 8 p.m. local time, and just about a few minutes ago they announced another 2-hour extension up to 10 p.m. It's a usual process that takes place during presidential elections, and usually the voting for such a case would extend up until midnight for local time. That's about less than 3 hours from where we at right now. And it depends, of course, on how many people want to turn out. And the Supreme Leader himself earlier this morning called all Iranians, whoever they support, to join these elections to boost up these turnout figures.
Adele, what do you think the biggest issues are going to be for voters in this election?
It is clear for the candidates and among all the citizens, even those we've spoken to during the past week, that the economy tops the agenda. It tops the agenda of the reformists, it tops the agenda of the principalists or the conservatives, and all the candidates. The economy has taken a great part of the debates that have been taking place during the past few days. In general, because of the international sanctions imposed on Iran, a country with a trade balance surplus of $20 billion is facing a major budget deficit, and its economy has been restrained from growing to its capacity, and therefore having a lot of hardships on the daily lives of Iranians, pushing thousands. There's a research that estimates 65,000 Iranians migrate every year from the country to flee the economic conditions. We're talking about people with high-level educations, university degrees, and postgraduates as well, which is a brain drain for this country. So it's a target for all candidates to engage quickly with the economy, but of course with all of them having to push their presidential race a year earlier because of the tragic death of President Raisi. None of them has prepared what they would have in terms of an economical plan if they were running in their usual time next year.
Adele, keep us posted on the result. Thank you for that. Our correspondent Adele Al-Marouki in Tehran.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, how the Democratic Republic of Congo is trying to put an end to a deadly disease that's been circulating for years. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Sally Burdett. Our top stories. Lost for words, panic among United States Democrats as Joe Biden stumbles and stutters his way through the first presidential debate.
Raise taxes to cut debt levels. That's the blunt message from the International Monetary Fund to the United States.
And Argentina's President Javier Milei wins backing for a sweeping program of economic reform aimed at kick-starting the country's troubled economy.
Chinese President Xi Jinping says he's planning big changes to deepen reform and further open the world's second-largest economy. He was speaking on the 70th anniversary of China's founding foreign policy principles. Xi said China's modernization will eventually create a market larger than all the developed countries combined. He also announced more support for the Global South to aid development. China's Communist Party will be holding a key political meeting in July when further measures are expected.
China's president and his Peruvian counterpart, President Bouarte, have agreed to strengthen relations as they meet in Beijing. She called for joint efforts to ensure the completion of the Chansey megaport, which is due to become a Pacific shipping hub. Both sides also signed agreements on trade, digital economy, technology, customs inspection and media cooperation. Bouarte is currently on a state visit to China, her first trip to the country since taking office in 2022, and the first by a Peruvian leader in 8 years.
Guinea's foreign minister says the world should stop returning to division and focus its fight elsewhere. He spoke to CGTN at the Crans-Montana Forum in Brussels.
The world had already been through the Cold War, as we know. We've done that already. It is nevertheless unfortunate that bad experiences of the world are returning. We have suffered from the war, and now we are reliving the same thing again. And then the division of the world into two poles, east, west. The Cold War for years, the confrontation has had repercussions on our countries. And we, who are neither from the west nor the east, have felt the impact in Africa. So it's awful. It's amazing to see that the world is doing the same thing again that didn't work. So for Lung in Guinea, it's simple. The world should at least think so as to not return to war, to stop returning to division. We have common enemies of humanity. The common enemies of humanity are pathogens, climate change. Our planet is under threat, and these are the common enemy. Much more energy and thought could be put into this fight than continuing to fight on both sides.
A new, more deadly strain of Mpox is spreading through the Democratic Republic of Congo. There have been 20,000 cases and 1,000 deaths, mostly children, since the start of last year. But as our correspondent Chris Okamringen reports, there's hope new vaccines could help tackle the disease that's been circulating for more than 50 years.
Congolese officials authorized the use of 2 Mpox vaccines after recording a rise in cases of the viral disease across the country. The vaccines are made by a Japanese pharmaceutical company known as KM Biologics. According to the DRC Health Ministry, more than 9,000 cases of Mpox and 410 deaths have been recorded since the beginning of this year. Health officials are worried that a new strain of Mpox detected in the mining town of Kamituga earlier this year is spreading fast in the east of the country. The strain known as Clade 1b is deadlier than the one that was reported globally in 2022. Scientists say it can be transmitted sexually. Mpox is a viral infection that spreads through close contact with infected people or wild animals. The first human case of Mpox was discovered in the forested area in the DRC in 1970. The disease has historically been found among people who eat infected bushmeat in West and Central Africa. But the new deadly strain in the DRC has raised fears of the spread of the disease to other countries. Chris Okamringen, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Jean-Claude Udahemuka is a lecturer at the University of Rwanda, which is monitoring the outbreak. Jean-Claude, thank you so much for joining us. Is the vaccine effective against this new, more deadly strain of Mpox?
Well, for the moment, there are 2 vaccines. Like you said, there's that one that is manufactured in Japan, and there's also the one by Bavarian Nordic. These vaccines, they are similar to the ones that used to be applied for smallpox, and that was stopped in the 80s. They generally generate the immune response. Actually, it did for Clade 2b, but for this one in Eastern DRC, Clade 1b, we hope it will, because the virus has a huge genome, so we hope it will protect, but we need also clinical trials on this. So we need data for a solid ground.
All right, so you're hopeful that the vaccines will help prevent transmission of this new, more deadly strain of Mpox. Meanwhile, from your monitoring, are the proper measures in place to actually contain the strain within the DRC and stop it spreading to other countries?
Yeah, I think the governments in the region have been maybe contacting each other, and also international organizations have been involved. From what I know, there was a WHO meeting with international players from the region that was held in Kinshasa earlier this year. And also there was some other meetings that were held for migration. But also we need more measures. We need more measures, especially at entry points, at borders, to test people who are crossing borders so that we don't we reduce the risk of the virus or the disease crossing borders.
And it's interesting what we're seeing in South Africa. The strain there is not the most deadly strain, but 3 people have already died. And we're seeing children and people with compromised immune systems are very vulnerable to even the less deadly forms. I suppose the ultimate question and fear is whether Mpox has the potential to become as problematic as COVID did, or have we learnt our lessons?
For the case of South Africa, the deaths that they registered, the government said that they were all from people who were HIV positive and they were not taking their medications, so their immune system was down, because the strain there is similar to the one that has been circulating in Europe and North America since 2022. So I think what made grave their situations were the comorbidities that they have, which was HIV status and also not taking ARVs. Coming back to the question whether Mpox has the ability to cause problems like what COVID did, it's too early maybe to say, but it's a disease worth watching, and everyone should be in the game now, not tomorrow.
Yeah, and as you said, more measures are needed. Thank you so much, Jean-Claude Udahemuka, lecturer at the University of Rwanda, which of course is monitoring the Mpox outbreak, this deadly strain in the DRC.
Thank you, too.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, why range anxiety and long charging times might be about to be resolved in the world of electric vehicles.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Critics of electric vehicles often say their limited range, long charging times and the degradation of car batteries are all barriers to buying these cars. But that might be about to change.
An electric car battery developed by a UK startup has successfully charged from 10 to 80% in just over 4.5 minutes in its first live track test. The achievement came from the company Nyobolt, which used a specially built sports car at a proving ground near the English town of Bedford. Well, Dr. Sai Shivareddy is co-founder and the CEO of Nyobolt.
We started Nyobolt in 2019 with a vision to bring down the recharging times to refueling times. So the convenience that we have been used to over many decades driving our vehicles is not there when we switch over to electric vehicles, right? So our vision was to bring down that charging time such that we have the same convenience and we have a great experience in transitioning to clean energy. So that's the vision, and how we do what we did is really coming down to the fundamental science breakthrough that we've had about 4 or 5 years ago, where we've had new materials that were discovered to charge up the battery fully in a few minutes. And for the very first time, we've been able to take all of that new material technology, put it into lithium-ion battery cells in traditional processes, but using our new material inside the cell and bringing about a full system level capability to charge the vehicle fully in under 10 minutes, or depending on the charger, what we demonstrated yesterday.
We report a lot on this program about range anxiety and why that's a barrier to ownership, particularly in Europe. We hear a lot about the time that it takes to charge electric cars. We also hear, of course, about this degradation issue, that batteries simply get clapped out. Where are you on that?
Oh, that's the biggest problem we've actually overcome in our development. So we have invented these materials to accept a lot of power so they can charge multiple times repeatedly under very fast charge conditions to overcome the degradation problem. The way we do that is to reduce the impedance inside the material, or the resistance for the ion to charge and discharge. And once you reduce the impedance, lesser heat is generated, and that means you end up with better performance over the lifetime. So we don't have any of the degradation problems you would have heard from other batteries in the market. We've demonstrated that the technology lasts for over 4,000 cycles, charge-discharge cycles under fast charge conditions, and that's really a big breakthrough.
Okay, so brilliant breakthrough, but the big question, how long before this clever science is in the car showrooms?
In small volumes, look, this car is actually on an existing platform, so we've not really redesigned the whole car platform, and it's been a journey to try and retrofit into an existing platform. So I think it depends on the volumes, really. Small volumes, we can do that within the year, and bigger volumes, it's going to take many parties to come together and agree on, where and when and how we do these things. But we're thinking about the normal timescales around an automobile industry adoption for large volumes of 3 to 4 years, at least.
What happens next? Are you waiting for that phone call from Elon Musk at Tesla or the guys who run BYD?
Well, we're waiting to roll out our battery into every car that's on the road that needs a fast charge, or every vehicle or every device, ultimately.
The headlines again. President Xi Jinping promises big changes to deepen reforms and further open up the world's second largest economy.
Lost for words, panic among US Democrats as Joe Biden stumbles and stutters his way through the first presidential debate.
And Argentina's president, Javier Milei, wins backing for a sweeping program of economic reform aimed at kickstarting the country's troubled economy.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com. And do follow CGTN Europe on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN Africa Live. From the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.